We have been starting off 2018 by talking about our mission as a church, which is, like most churches, about making disciples of Jesus. And we express it this way. We want to help people experience God in a daily relationship with him. Follow Jesus in sacrificial obedience. That's what we talked about last week. Taking up your cross and following him, not just, walk in the park, but learning to die to self and live for him. Loving each other and serving the world. And today we're going to talk about what it means to love each other in authentic community. Now, at first glance, this would seem to be the feel-good aspect of our mission, wouldn't it? Isn't that kind of like a nice, warm fuzzy? We want to bring everyone together into a nice, big, spiritual family. Has a good feel to it, doesn't it? It's all about love, right? There's that sort of nice, happy feeling that we think about when we think about loving each other, this big, nice heart. And if it were that simple, then the sermon would be pretty short. I could just say, love each other. We would have a big group hug, and then we could end with the potluck. This week, too, right? But the thing is, we're not here just to create feelings of togetherness and warmth and community. We're actually here to create real community. You can get feelings of community at a Jack Johnson concert. But we're here to create, and I don't discourage that, but we're here to create something different. We're here to create authentic, true community. See, a lot of what people think about in our culture today as community is actually what I would call pseudo-community. Pseudo-community is the kind of community that you get where as long as you don't really show your true self, as long as you just show the parts that everybody wants to see, as long as you kind of go along with the group think, as long as you toe the line, as long as you fit the mold, then we can have a nice community. But the moment that you step outside of that mold, whatever it is, then you're kind of pushed away or yelled at, encouraged to conform. So pseudo-community is community that's based on if you do certain things, if you look a certain way, if you fit into a certain type of mold, then you're a part of our community, and if not, you're kind of on the outside. And unfortunately, a lot of churches specialize in pseudo-community. A lot of churches specialize in creating the kind of community that says you can be a part of us as long as you walk this particular path, as long as you look this way, as long as you use this language, as long as you throw out these words. However you want to take that. Throw them out or throw them out. But anyway, churches tend to specialize in that. And it's unfortunate because I think that church is meant to be authentic community. Problem is, authentic community is messy. Authentic community is hard work. Now, I don't know if anybody told you that marriage was going to be hard work. If you're married, that people always tell you that at the beginning. You're in love, and you're just, everything's roses and rainbows and unicorns. And people will take you aside and say, well, marriage is going to be hard work. And you're like, hard work? I can do hard work. Let's build a wall. Let's, put up a shed. Hard work is something I can do. And then you get into marriage and you discover that the kind of hard work that they meant is not the kind that involves a hammer or a power saw. It's the kind of hard work that involves emotions and relationships. And it's the same thing when it comes to building authentic community in the church. It's hard work, but it's not the kind of hard work that maybe some of us like to do. It's emotional and relational hard work. Authentic community is messy because it means that we see each other as we are, with all of our warts and wrinkles, not just all the pretty nice parts. Authentic community means that sometimes we hurt each other. We misunderstand each other. We step on each other's toes. And that when that happens, we confront each other. We seek understanding. We offer forgiveness. And we do this again and again and again. How many times? How many times do I have to put up with your crap? That's what Peter asked Jesus one time. And he said, like, 7 times? Would that be enough? Like, if the same person keeps doing the same thing to me again and again, would 7 times be pretty generous? And Jesus is like, try 70 times 7. And so I'm sure at that point Peter got out a little clicker and was like, I'm going to have to click this off because 490 is harder to count in my head. Just kidding. I think Jesus kind of meant you're going to have to keep doing it again and again. And that's the hard work of authentic community. And so this quadrant of our mission, while it might seem like the nice, feel-good, happy part, is actually perhaps the most difficult part of living as a follower of Jesus, engaging in true and actual community. And I don't think that this was any surprise to Jesus. I don't think that it's an accident that when Jesus calls us to follow him, he calls us to follow him in the context of community. He calls us to follow him together. I want to pick up where we left off in the scriptures a couple weeks ago. I want to turn to the passage that comes right after the vine and the branches passage that we talked about, where Jesus said, hey, the most important thing to live a fruitful life is to stay connected to the vine. In other words, if you want to live a significant, successful, good life, you have to stay connected to God, to him. And then Jesus goes right into this passage here. We pick up at verse 9 in John chapter 15. He says, as the Father has loved me, Jesus, so have I, Jesus, loved you. Now, remain in my love. Stay connected to my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love. You will stay connected to my love, just as I kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. So what Jesus is saying here is, hey, I have really loved you guys. I've loved you completely. And if you want to stay connected to that love, if you want to stay aware of it, if you want to show that love back to me, the thing that I'd really like you to do is just do the things that I ask you to do. That's how you can show your love to me. Just, I did what my Father asked me to do, and now I'm going to ask you to do some things. And just, if you want to show your love to me, just do the things that I'm asking you to do. And then he says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. In other words, this is not meant to be a burden. This is not meant to be something awful. It's meant to actually be a source of joy in our lives, listening to Jesus, expressing our love toward him by doing what he asks. Then he says this, my command is this. Like if I were just to sum up everything I want you guys to do, let me just sum it up this way. Love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. Then he goes on, he talks about more stuff, but I'm going to stop it there. Let's reflect on that for a moment. What Jesus is saying is, hey, if you want to show your love to me, if you want to stay connected to me in this loving relationship, just do what I ask. And the one thing that I really want you to do is to love each other. And that's nice, isn't it? That sounds really easy. It's like, oh, this Christianity thing is not so hard. It's just love each other. Okay, fine. Except that he adds on the as I loved you. And then he goes into talking about this, I'm sure, completely unrelated idea that the greatest kind of love that you could show is to lay down your life for someone. And this is the night before his crucifixion, and so he's about to do that for his disciples. And so what he's really saying is, if you want to show your love for me, if you want to show your appreciation for me that I have laid down my life for you, then you should go out and lay down your lives for each other. That's the truest, greatest expression of love. And now, I'm sure that Jesus may have meant this literally, and that there may sometimes be opportunities for us literally to put our own life on the line for each other. But I'm equally sure, based on all of Jesus' other teachings and his invitation to take up our crosses and follow him, that he meant this figuratively as well. And that much more than we have the opportunity to actually lay down our lives and die for each other, we have regular opportunities to offer up parts of ourselves for the sake of those around us, for the sake of other people. And that is the kind of love that he's calling us to, the kind of love that puts aside our own comfort, that puts aside our own needs, that puts aside our own desires, dreams, wants, etc., for the sake of other people. And Jesus says, if you want to show your love to me, if you want to stay connected to my love, do what I ask. And what I ask is that you love each other in a self-sacrificial sort of way. In other words, when we think of love within a Christian community, the shape that we should think about is not a heart, but a cross. That Jesus calls us to love each other. It's very similar to his call that we take up our crosses and follow him. When he calls us to love each other in the same way that he loved us, he's calling us to die to our own desires and wants and comforts and needs, and to put in front of ourselves the comforts, needs, desires, and wants of other people. This is a long, slow, painful dying to self. A lot like crucifixion. So when you think of love, in this sense, it's not the warm, fuzzy hearts, the chocolates, the roses of Valentine's Day. It is the self-sacrifice and true desire to meet the needs and do good for others that Jesus exemplified at the cross. To love each other in authentic community, to be a part of a church, will sometimes feel like torture. Has anyone experienced this? To be in relationship with people sometimes feels like dying to yourself. But of course, what we talked about last week, the reason that Jesus calls us to die to ourselves is not because he's cruel, not because he doesn't like us, but because he has something better. He calls us to die to ourselves so that we can come to life, to a new self, so that we can be resurrected. The problem with us is that sometimes when we look at our own lives, it's hard to see the parts that need to die. Does anybody have this experience? You look at your life and you go, oh, I'm doing all right. Jesus looks at us and he says, actually, there's some things that need to die. Well, guess what one of the best ways to expose the things inside of me that need to die is put me in a group of people. Because in a group of people, in authentic community where we take off our masks, we stop pretending to be perfect all the time, and we actually let each other see inside, and we actually live together in such a way that we're on mission together, we're doing important things together. When that happens, there are parts of myself that I can't help but look at and go, didn't know that was in there. That's not very nice, isn't it? Why do I keep acting this way? There might be something inside of me that needs to die. And so Jesus, I'm sure, knew what he was doing when he calls us together into community, when he says, basically, if you want to follow me, you need to do that as a group, because there's certain things that I can only show you in the context of community. And not all of those things are happy and warm and fuzzy. Some of them are painful. If you have ever looked around at the messiness of the church, if you've ever looked around and seen the bad things that happen among church people and church leaders, and you just thought to yourself, it's just not right. It's not the way that it should be. You are absolutely wrong. Church was meant to be messy because church was meant to be real. It involves real human beings. God's not surprised when we have a hard time getting along in the church. God knew that was going to happen. It's us that are shocked. Oh my goodness, conflict in the church. God's like, why do you think I brought you together? So you could work out your conflicts and be stretched and grow. But we're shocked. So just remember this. When you have in your mind this image of a group of people all getting along, always doing and saying the right things, always just, connecting in this harmonious way, you're thinking not of church, you're thinking of heaven. okay? Because until we get to heaven, we're always going to step on each other's toes. We're always going to have struggles because all of us are on the journey. All of us are imperfect. As long as the church is filled with human beings, it's going to be messy. Now, if you want evidence of this, just read through the New Testament sometime, okay? Look to the first Christians who came together and tried to live in these churches, and you will see that their experience was incredibly messy. Even when Jesus was with them, they had misunderstandings, power struggles, they had messy relationships at that time. But if you go forward to after Jesus left and they're trying to live in these new churches, well, most of the New Testament is written to fix problems that they were having. If church wasn't messy, we wouldn't have a New Testament because there wouldn't have been any need to write these letters. It would just be, keep up the good work. You guys are doing great. No conflicts in 1,000 days. You know, like one of those signs at a factory. But that's not how it was. If you read the New Testament, you'll find some very, very messy things. You'll find people not getting along, people not understanding things. You'll find selfishness at work. You'll find all kinds of messiness because the church is full of humans. And the reason God brought us together is to help us get better one little bit at a time. So, this whole idea of healthy community is something that we have been committed to since the beginning. In fact, it's spelled out right here on the wall. I don't know if anybody's taken time to read through that. But the signs on the wall are a shortened form of the little page that you have on your seats today. So there's lots of extra around if you didn't get one. This is our healthy community commitment. And the third Sunday that we ever met, we handed these out, and we went through them, and we signed them, and we kept them. And I still have mine from that first Sunday. And before I changed all my office around, it hung near my desk to remind me of the commitments that I had made. Now, I'm not always perfect at these things. I don't claim to be. But it's a good reminder of what we're shooting for. And so what I thought we could do today as we talk about this idea of aiming for loving each other in the context of authentic community, I thought, why don't we go through this again and revisit this healthy community commitment? So I'm going to go through point by point. If you want to follow along on your little sheet, we're going to talk about what our vision is for healthy community. Now, don't follow along with these signs because these signs, A, are condensed so they fit on boards, and B, they're arranged aesthetically rather than in the same order on the page here. So, so ignore them for now. Let them be a reminder to you each Sunday, but for now we'll go through it in the order that it is on this page. The first one is this: I commit to being authentic and honest and refusing to wear masks or to pretend to be someone that I'm not. This is essential. This is where it all starts. The choice to be honest, even about our faults, is important because as long as we're faking it, we're only ever able to live in pseudo-community. We're not allowed to live, or we can't live in authentic community until each of us makes this choice to sort of open up a bit. Now that is no small step because it means vulnerability. Masks are there for self-protection. When you take off your mask, you're taking off your armor. You're taking off your padding. It means that you can get hurt. So there's courage that it takes to step out and be yourself and open up. It means that you might be rejected. And so that's why this is an important first step, but it's a very difficult first step. Now, I'm going to offer a bit of a caveat here. There is a certain art to knowing when to be honest about what, okay? And so what I'm not talking about here is airing your dirty laundry to the first person you meet. Now, let me tell you a little bit about myself here, the things I struggle with. Here's what I did last week. No. There is a gradual unfolding. There is a natural process that takes place if we let it. And so forcing this or rushing it is not necessarily healthy either. I've once heard that confession and microphones should not go together. Okay. The other side that I would say we're not talking about here is I'm just going to tell everyone what I really think now. I think it's Ephesians 4 talks about speaking the truth in love. And so we're not talking about causing blunt force trauma, not caring what anybody else or how it affects anyone else, just speaking my truth. There is an art form here, and it is okay sometimes to hold back bits of the truth. Do these jeans make my butt look fat? Thank you. I feel uncomfortable now. There are times, and Jay may not be your best example of someone who speaks the truth in love. So there is an art form, but the idea is that we gradually take off these masks and learn to be honest with each other. And that actually goes hand in hand with the second item on the list, which is I commit to accepting others in the church as they are without condition. See, pseudo-community is I accept you with condition. I accept you as long as you fit my mold, as long as you fit the group, as long as you believe this or that, as long as you act this or that. This is about accepting people without condition. Now, imagine that you're wearing a mask, and this mask is on here to protect yourself, and you're starting to get to know a group of people, and they seem loving, and they seem safe, and so you tentatively, gradually begin to take that mask off and show who you actually are, and as soon as you have the mask off, they stick a fork in your face. What are you going to do at that point? You're going to put the mask on. Oh, probably you won't come back. But you're definitely going to put the mask on, and you're not going to take it off again in a hurry. It's quite simple that in order to create a space where people are comfortable taking their masks off, we have to refrain from sticking them in the face with a fork. It's just that simple. What I mean by that is if we want people to be honest and be themselves, we cannot attack them or judge them once they do that. We'll never have authentic community as long as there's this risk of, if I show you who I really am, even with my warts and wrinkles, that you're going to somehow cause me pain, jab me in the face with a fork. If we want people to take their masks off, sometimes it's going to be like the Phantom of the Opera, right? You take that mask off, and there's some messy, ugly stuff underneath there. And what we need to do is refrain from gasping or being shocked, or telling them to put the mask back on, or stabbing them in the face with a fork. Do you know who this is the hardest for? Church people. People who have been Christians all their lives are so used to everyone around them wearing masks and pretending everything's okay all the time, they really have the shock when they see the inside and see how things really are. Here's a clue. Stuff has been happening in churches all along. It's just whether we're honest about it or not. And so church people have to learn that church is not a place where everything looks neat and tidy and pretty and nice all the time. That sometimes it's messy, and that's okay. It's the way that it's supposed to be. So the first step in this process of community is accepting that MCC is a church of screwed up people led by a screwed up pastor. Okay? If you can accept that, then we can move forward in community. Now, I also want to make something else clear. Accepting people is not the same as accepting behavior. I see people inside and outside the church get this wrong all the time. What I see people outside the church in general culture, they kind of get it wrong this way. They say, basically, if you're going to accept me, you need to accept everything that I do and all my choices. That's what it means to accept me. And that's simply not true. I can accept you and love you as a person and still disagree with you and still not think that everything you do is right or good. That's how I feel about all of you, by the way. I accept and love you. But I don't necessarily put my stamp of approval on everything in your life, and nor do you need me to, right? I can love you, I can be your friend, I can sacrifice for you, I can get close to you and disagree with choices that you make, things that you do, with beliefs that you have. So you don't have to accept everything about a person and agree with everything about a person in order to accept the person as someone loved by God, a valuable, interesting, awesome human being. Does that make sense? Culture will tell you that if you don't agree with someone, then you're not being accepting. Not true. You can be accepting and even loving and just not agree with everything. In the church, I see the similar belief, but it comes out in a different way. Basically, it says this. If I act in an accepting, kind, and loving way towards that person, does it mean I'm condoning their behavior? Does it mean that I'm sending the wrong message if I hang out with sinners? Well, you can find that attitude very clearly in the Bible. The Pharisees, who were like Jesus' arch enemies, did an incredible job of not hanging around with sinners because it would send the wrong message. And Jesus came along, and he demonstrates this way of accepting and loving and hanging around with sinners, not so he can preach at them and tell them that they better straighten up or they're going to hell, but just as their friend, eating meals with them, treating them like normal human beings. Now, he didn't necessarily condone or put his stamp of approval on everything that they did. But he also didn't come with a condemning, judging attitude, saying, I'll come over for supper at your house if you change your ways. He started with acceptance and then moved toward transformation. And that's what we want to do at this church. We want to start with an acceptance of people wherever they're at without condition, but not so they can stay there, not so they can just remain however they are, but because acceptance and love is the best environment to produce change and growth that God wants for us. And so that leads us to the third part of this healthy community commitment, a very countercultural idea. I commit to helping others grow by encouraging them, by gently correcting them when they are off track, and by enabling them to become all they can be in every area of life. I also commit to allowing others to do the same for me by being accessible and responsive. Okay, lots of scripture there. You can go read those. But I want to make the point that this is out of the ordinary in our culture. It seems like in our culture there are two options. You either are a live and let live, anything goes, I don't really care what you do sort of person, which is the ideal in our culture, or you are a judgmental, condemning jerk. Okay? Those are kind of the two options. Our culture has polarized on this. And the truth is what we're trying to do is walk this line that says, I accept you as you are, but I'm also going to help you grow into all that you can be. And that is a tough tightrope to walk. In the context of authentic community, we actually take responsibility for each other's growth. I actually care if you're in trouble, if you're off track, if you're doing something that I see as harmful. I care enough to do the hard relational work of talking to you about it. Now, the scriptures talk about teaching each other, talks about exhorting each other, encouraging each other, spurring each other on. Galatians 6:1 says that if we see someone caught in a sin, we should restore them gently. And so we don't just leave them. We don't just say, well, who am I to judge? You know, they're making their own choices. We're actually supposed to be interested in restoring people who we believe are caught in sin. That we're interested in bringing them back onto the right path and walking with God, but that we do that gently. Now, at this point, we have moved into a type of community that doesn't happen on Sunday morning. It really can't happen on Sunday morning. There's just too many of us now. At one point, we were small enough that Sunday morning was kind of all we needed to create this kind of community. But now we have grown too big, and it's hard on a Sunday morning to come in and form the kind of relationships where we can encourage each other to grow, where we can confront each other when we're off track. What we're talking about here is stuff that happens outside of Sunday morning during the week. And as a church, that's what our small groups are all about. Small groups meet during the week to begin to form authentic community in the size of group that it can actually happen in. Now, we haven't traditionally been very good at having a lot of small groups. I think because when we were small, we got that sort of community need met. As we grow larger, our small groups are going to be an absolutely essential part of our church. Getting together and forming the kind of community where we can take off our masks and be honest with each other and help each other grow. So you're going to hear more about these small groups in the coming weeks. And two things to keep in mind as we talk about small groups. Small groups do some sort of a study, usually Bible study, whatever. We're talking about doing maybe some sermon-based small groups in the near future. And that's good, but that's a secondary reason. The primary reason we meet in small groups is to form biblical community. The other thing to keep in mind is we often approach a small group thinking, well, what will I get out of this? We're used to that, right? What will I get out of this? But this idea of helping others grow says that we should be equally concerned about what we can put into it, how we can help the other people in our group grow and become all that God designed them to be. So, moving on to number 4. I commit to moving away from a self-centered life and moving towards an other-centered life, serving people with selfless love. Now, we are all naturally self-centered. I don't know if you've ever noticed that about people, but we tend to be kind of all about ourselves. Even when sometimes we serve and do good, we are doing so from a selfish motivation. Have you ever said or heard someone say, it just makes me feel so good when I help other people? Anyone? No? What if it didn't make you feel good? Would you still help other people? You see, it's possible to help other people for good feelings and not because it's what God has called you to do, not because you're dying to self and sacrificing and serving them. And so this whole idea of moving away from self-centeredness to other-centeredness is a lifelong process. You might come in and you might meet Jesus and you might think about yourself, your own needs, your own wants. What do people think about me? What's in it for me? How does this, meet one of my needs? You might think about yourself 99% of the time, and the Holy Spirit comes in and begins to work on you. And in a year, you are thinking about other people 4% of the time now, and yourself only 96% of the time. And that is progress, and that is growth. And that's the kind of growth that we can get excited about, because all of us kind of start thinking about ourselves most of the time. And we're moving away from that and moving towards the kind of lives where we take up our crosses and we lay down our lives for other people, even when it doesn't feel good. And one of the ways that we reveal that we're moving from self-centered to other-centered, it comes out in our words. It comes out in our conversations. And that's what the 5th point on this list is. I commit to refrain from negativity, gossip, jealousy, bitterness, and talking behind the back of a leader or any other person in the church. There is nothing that kills authentic community faster than negative talk and gossip. Because the question that you always ask when someone's gossiping to you is what? If they're saying this to me about them, what do they say about me when I'm not around, right? And so gossip sort of kills this. And I understand how easy it is to fall into. And I admit I sometimes fall into it too. I am not perfect in this area. But there's this sage, wise advice that comes down to us through the years through Thumper, actually his mom. If you can't say something nice, don't say nothing at all. Now, a lot of Christians seem pretty concerned about using the right words, meaning not swearing, right? That this is like the mark of a Christian, someone who doesn't swear. And they forget that the scriptures actually have a lot more to say about the rest of our talk than they do about swearing. For example, where am I here? Ephesians 4:29 says this, "Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, so that it may benefit those who listen." Whew. And you thought not swearing was hard. Can you imagine that if people said, you know what? Oh, that person goes to MCC. They're a Christian. And you know what? I never hear them say anything bad about anyone not even the government. Right, I know. It's unrealistic. We have a habit of complaining about each other, about our leaders. We have a habit of just sort of this negative way of talking. I fall into it as well. But Jesus actually calls us to a higher standard, and being in community with each other means that we absolutely refuse to talk about each other behind each other's back. That we speak positively. We speak things that build each other up. Will we get it always right? No, but that's what we're aiming for. Now, what happens if you have a problem with someone who's hurt you? If there is anything that is inevitable in the church or any other community, it is conflict. Conflict will happen. So accept this fact. You will, at some point, be hurt by someone else in this community. Look around the room. Someone in here will, at some point, hurt you. Hurt your feelings, let you down, ding you emotionally somehow. Now, look around again. Accept this fact. You will, despite your best efforts, at some point, hurt someone in this community. You will let them down, you will ding them, you will offend them in some way. So we accept the fact that there will be conflict in a church. And what we say in this last point is, I commit to dealing with that conflict immediately and directly according to the model Jesus taught. So let's look at this model that Jesus taught in Matthew 18. Very, very complex, very, very difficult to understand. I may be being facetious. Matthew 18, starting at verse 15, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. Jesus is quoting from the Old Testament. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. So let's go through that real quick here. Someone has sinned against you, offended you, hurt you in some way. You have this thing you're stewing about. I can't believe they said that to me. I don't know what they meant by that. I don't know why they said that. I don't know why they did that. They let me down. What do? You go to them, and you work it out. And you express to them, hey, the other day, now you don't necessarily have to take this literally. You have sinned. Okay, that may not be helpful. Couching it in maybe more gentle terms, like, hey, the other day when you said this, it kind of made me feel rejected or hurt. Or when you didn't come, you didn't say anything like that kind of bothered me. I just wanted to bring it up so it doesn't fester. I just wanted to bring it up. I'm not looking for you to grovel on the floor begging for forgiveness. I just want to make sure this doesn't come between us. Now, if that doesn't work and you can't clear out the garbage and restore the relationship, and by the way, 99% of the time in my experience, that does work. That's it. That's end of story. You have a nice hug and everything's good. But if it doesn't, then it's time to bring in a third person. Someone maybe both of you trust, a mediator, to kind of listen and help you work it through. And if that doesn't work, you bring it to the church, which means we give you a microphone on Sunday morning and you tell, no. That's not how we interpret that. At that point, you would bring myself as the pastor or the leadership into it, and we would try to help you work it out. And finally, if that doesn't work, you treat them like a pagan or a tax collector. Now, back in those days, a pagan or a tax collector were very unspiritual, irreligious, sinner-type people. And they were the people that Jesus hung around with and was nice to all the time. So what does it mean to treat someone like a pagan or a tax collector? You be nice to them, you love them. So nothing really changes. And I'm sure that was a little tricky thing that Jesus threw in there. Jesus loved and gave himself for tax collectors and what was the other thing? Yes, pagans, yes. And so the fact that he calls us to treat someone like a tax collector and a pagan means we're supposed to treat them very well, very kindly, very lovingly, but maybe like someone who we have some fundamental disagreement with. Does that make sense? Now, are you feeling intimidated yet? If anyone feel like they can consistently live up to this commitment? No, it's not about being perfect. It's about our vision for a healthy community, where we're headed, where we believe that God is calling us to. Now, what happens when we get this right? It seems that Jesus thinks a lot hangs on this. He says it again and again and again and again. Love each other, love each other, love each other as I have loved you. And this is what he says in John 13, 34 to 35. He says, a new command I give to you, love one another. And they're like, oh, that's not very new. You've been saying that for 3 years now. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. The defining mark of a Christian is meant to be their experience of community with each other. Now, as much as I would like this to say it's your love for the world around you, that's not actually what Jesus says. He still wants us to love the world around us. He's actually saying that the quality of the community that we experience amongst ourselves is the mark that will show the world that we're following him. And so a lot hangs on this. Now, at the church, we have different ways of trying to develop this. We have greeters at the door and coffee and hospitality team that tries to make people feel at home and welcome when they walk in for the first time so they can move towards this experience of community. We've got social events, potlucks, where we connect in a little bit deeper way than Sunday morning. And we've got small groups that I've talked about where we come together to share life with a smaller group of people. But the truth is that we as a church can only program for this to a very small extent. It really lies in your hands. And so what we have on the bottom of this is not a sign it and give it to me so I know that you've committed to it, because it's up to you to sign this, to decide you're going to live this way, and then to continue living this way. And so it's a sign it and stick it somewhere where it can remind you. I don't know, stick it somewhere just sounded, it was the wrong. Place it in an area where it can remind you of what you've committed to. And so this is not for us. This is for you. Because only each individual deciding to live in authentic community can make it happen here at this church. I want to pray, and then the band's just going to send us out with a fun song that celebrates this aspect, which, by the way, is something that I think we do pretty good at. So if I sound like I've been harsh, understand that I'm proud of the community that we've created. It's something I want to safeguard. It's something we can keep growing into. So let's pray. God, thank you so much for your goodness to us, and thank you for calling us together, not just to follow you as lone wolves or individuals, but to follow you as an authentic community, which is so much richer and also so much more difficult. I pray that you would allow each of us to begin to peel off the mask that we wear. Help each of us to find a small group of people, whether it's an official small group of the church or whether it's just a group of friends we hang out with, but where we can be real and we can help each other grow. And God, would you safeguard the unity that you've given us and help us to do our part in resolving conflict and refraining from negativity. God, we celebrate the unity that you have brought in this church. We celebrate the great community that you are weaving together and knitting together. And we just ask you to continue to lead us forward. In Jesus' name, amen.